Welcome to another edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. I'm your host, Jeremiah Preisser, and with me tonight again is John Einrenhofer. How you doing, John?
Hey, Jeremiah. Good to be here again. Looking forward to another week of talking about the sport of boxing.
Yes, as always, it's exciting. Of course, in many ways, it's not exciting. A lot to do with the sport, but
unfortunately,
yes, very unfortunate, especially for a sport that has a global appeal like this. See it mismanaged and run into the ground time and time again, certainly disheartening, especially as a veteran fan. But anyways, on to our first fight of last weekend, and I think just about the only notable fight that we had in Glasgow, Scotland. So Ricky Burns in his backyard versus Julius Indongo. Indongo he came onto the scene with a bang. He fought Edward Troyanovsky in Russia. A lot of people didn't know much about Indongo, aside from the clear physical size that he had. But he ended up scoring a sizable upset with a nice left hand, put Troyanovsky out. Ricky Burns, of course, is, I'm certainly not going to make much of this, but you heard it from the British press, especially Ricky Burns and this many weight champion with this many titles, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, it was Indongo versus Burns in Burns' backyard. What did you think of the fight, John?
Well, I thought Indongo won every round. I'm not one of these people that tries to pretend that they didn't make a prediction before that after the fact, or I knew that what was going to happen. I thought Burns would maybe be able to get a decision just because the Indongo KO of Troyanovsky was so quick, and the odds makers had Burns a favorite, leading me to believe that everybody was the consensus was that it was kind of a one-punch thing that Troyanovsky walked into. But Indongo was able to have too much for Burns, and this is with the benefit of the hindsight, but what I should have thought before the fight was that Ricky Burns is still just Ricky Burns. I do have to defend myself saying Ricky Burns was not a top 10 fighter in any kind of top 10 despite the alphabet organization belts. He's not a top 10 if you only ranked 8 divisions like the original 8. He's not top 10 even if you only ranked 140 pounders with one champion, which to me is disturbing, and that'll be part of our theme this week when we go over other fights, because that is the type of thing that I think really hurts the sport. So what really was Burns coming in? He wasn't a 3-time world champion, despite what the British press said and the belts he had, not trying to disrespect him, but you've got to look at fighters' resumes and who they've beaten, and then you do the old quick, what's the Ricky Burns signature win? You're going to hear crickets when you ask that question of anyone, and a lot of times I will do that when somebody gets too carried away with a certain fighter. Indongo didn't look bad, of course, or anything, but he doesn't have a big KO percentage despite the Troyanovsky knockout. Burns, frankly, I do have to say, and I think that some people commenting during the fight did say that, Burns looked actually like he was afraid to engage, and that was part of it, that he looked very early on like he wasn't in it to win it. He was content to go 12 rounds and take the loss. So I was then troubled after the fight by everybody raving about Indongo. I don't want to take away from a guy for getting a shutout win, but again, let's say we're ranking 17 divisions. Okay, got a legit top 10 win when he knocked out Troyanovsky and won, but Burns was not a legit top 10 win. So how is he supposedly a good fight for Terence Crawford at this point? This is the type of thing, to me, we don't need knowledgeable boxing fans talking about.
Right, and you see that sort of talk. I'll come right back to that. Well, no, let's just finish that off, because with Indongo, I was starting to see the same thing, and I too was troubled. You see Indongo versus Crawford. I see it all sorts of, all over these boxing groups. Oh, who's going to win? Crawford's going to win. I mean, what did you see out of Indongo beating Ricky Burns? Who was smaller in stature? I mean, that's what I found most pronounced about the fight. Indongo was clearly the bigger guy, clearly he didn't let Burns into the fight. And it was good in terms of strategy. He threw a lot of punches. He maintained his distance well, and he kept, his foot on the pedal the whole time. But you also look at the first round, and he was, in my opinion, he was sloppy many times. He was throwing hooks that missed fairly widely, a number of punches that did so. But yeah, he beats Ricky Burns clearly, an older Ricky Burns than Crawford did. And all of a sudden he's a legitimate opponent for Terrence Crawford. I mean, I really think what this is coming from is the fact that Indongo is now a unified trinket holder. Okay, he's got the IBF title and the WBA title now. In my opinion, that doesn't really mean anything. I think you pointed out correctly in the sense that, okay, these are, they're trinkets and they mean something to, most of the fighters, but beating Ricky Burns it's not that big of a win. There are a number of guys who he could have fought, which I would have rated significantly higher. So, again, I'm not going to get it. And not only that, I didn't see much out of Indongo that told me he would have beat Crawford. Did you?
I didn't see anything out of Indongo that led me think he would be competitive against Crawford. I didn't see anything out of Indongo that leads me to believe he's going to beat Sergey Lipinets if they fight. But I have a feeling that Indongo will. Not trying to knock him. I mean, he did he went into enemy territory, but again, against Ricky Burns, I think Lipinets would knock him out. So I don't think he would be anxious to get off this pedestal he's been placed on and fight Lipinets.
Right, and what you see after the fight is not only talk of him fighting Crawford, which I suppose is a possibility if Crawford wants to stay at 140, but I've seen one of three avenues for Indongo. He may have a rematch with Troyanovsky, which I know Troyanovsky's been leveraging for a little while. He may fight Lipinets, who is apparently the IBF mandatory, or he may take his WBA title, lose the IBF, and move on to a guy like Terrence Crawford. So how do you think he does? Obviously, we know that Crawford whips him.
Right.
How do you think the Lipinets fight goes? Or I'm not sure you know much about Troyanovsky, but how do you think that plays out? Who do you think gets the fight? How do you think it plays out?
Well, I'm assuming, and as you and I both know, any fan that does not try to at least somewhat follow the business aspects of this sport will not know anything that can realistically happen or will not know why things happen. And the reason I say that when answering your question is I'm going to assume that Indongo is enough of a free agent that he would be able to fight Crawford on, say, HBO. If that is, in fact, the case, I would think that, and this is, again, what frustrates me about the way boxing fans are treating this fight, this would be something that would play perfectly into Top Rank and Bob Arum's MO to be able to have Terrence Crawford pick up maybe a decent payday against a guy like Indongo, who they know that he will not have any problems beating, and have it be hyped as being for a unified alphabet 140-pound belts. That's the type of thing, again, to me that hurts the sport. I don't need to see that. I think we've got to get. I know you and I are. I think all fans who have not need to get by looking at these alphabet organizations and thinking that we need to see a 140-pound alphabet organization unification to see Terrence Crawford fight Indongo. Why that matters to me is what we need fans to do, as difficult as it is, but if the sport is going to get back into the mainstream more and be healthy, is you need fans beating the drums for Terrence Crawford crossing over promotional lines and TV lines to fight a Keith Thurman, somebody like that, the winner of Kell Brook and Errol Spence. You're not going to get that if fans are going to accept things like Terrence Crawford against Julius Indongo.
I absolutely agree. But again, fans, don't be surprised if something like this happens. If you see something like Indongo versus Crawford, and don't be surprised if Crawford whips him. I mean, Indongo's not on that level I'm not even sure he beats Troyanovsky in a rematch. I'm not even sure he beats Lipinets, who isn't, not even, what has he got, 9 fights? Anyways, we're going to move on to this week's fights, and, there's a lot going on in British boxing, a lot of hope for a tall middleweight named Tommy Langford. He's going to be fighting Avtandil Kurchides. Not sure I got that right, but, if he's listening to the show, I apologize.
Might be Kurt Seedy on that one, but
Kurt Seedy, okay.
I wouldn't feel too confident either. But.
Okay, well, I don't think he's gonna twist our arm for getting it wrong. I'm sure it happens time and time again. But what you have is a British prospect versus a Georgian, I believe he's from Georgia, a Georgian veteran. Kurtzides, he had a good win over Antoine Douglas in a damn good fight. Langford really hasn't stepped up to this kind of level yet. So how do you see it playing out?
Well, I thought that Kurtzidi and Antoine Douglas was fight of the year. I think that's one of the things that's a shame that hurts boxing with premium cable. That was a showbox fight, and I love showbox. It's been great. My problem with it there is premium cable, people don't see it. And as far as I can tell, that fight, sometimes these fights will pop up on YouTube. A lot of people get to see them. I know a lot of hardcore fans that actually have not gotten to see that fight yet. I do subscribe to Showtime and HBO just for boxing. And I caught that one. I thought it was fight of the year. It was a great fight. Douglas gave it all he had, but Kurtzidi, he lived up to what he describes himself as modeling himself after Mike Tyson and trying to fight like a middleweight Mike Tyson. He doesn't have that kind of power, but he actually does come in with that customado type defense, and he just keeps coming with a lot of pressure forward. And he definitely fought the fight of his life that night against Douglas. He is in my top 10 in both the original 8, if you're ranking 8 divisions, and, of course, if you're ranking 17. And he's also in the top 10 of transnational and the ring. I like to look at those kind of barometers for what a fighter's standing in the game is, and then from that, what the significance of a fight is. So Kurtzidi brings it. My only question in this fight, besides the fact that Langford's 6 foot tall and there could be some height problem, but it wasn't a problem for Kurtzidi against Douglas, would be Kurtzidi's 37 years old. He fought the fight of his life. He's been off for a while. He fights a pressure style. Normally, a small pressure fighter would not even be competitive at his age. Even if he was a heavyweight, frankly. In other words, heavyweight, you last the longest age-wise, but there's not 37-year-old pressure heavyweights surviving. So my only reservation for him in this fight is if he walks up the ring stairs and after that brutal war with Douglas, because Douglas certainly gave a lot in that fight, despite taking the majority of the punishment, is that Kurtzidi goes up those ring stairs and he just has nothing. I do think that that's a possibility in this fight. I usually don't like to predict that because we just don't know. So I would think that based on what I saw in the last fight, if he brings any facsimile of that, he beats Langford by a decision and possibly even a later stoppage. But I do think there's a very, very real possibility in this fight, coming off that Douglas fight, that Kurtzidi walks up those stairs and he doesn't have it anymore.
Yeah, and that is a possibility, of course. Like you said, it's hard to tell when a guy is going to hit the wall. But in regards to his style, it is kind of Tyson-esque. I mean, the only problem is he doesn't have that sort of power. He's the kind of guy that he doesn't really have one-punch stuff. And he doesn't always get his body behind his hook, so he slaps a bit sometimes. But he's one of those guys who's going to come and get it. And if you're not prepared, and if you don't have power like Langford does not, in fact, Langford may be less of a fighter than Antoine Douglas was. So I'm going to favor Kurtzides here. I think he's going to did against Douglas, and he's just going to wear Langford down, and I think he's going to stop him late. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable scenario. Langford is not the fighter Antoine Douglas is. He was one of my favorite prospects. And remember, Douglas had a draw with Michel Soro, who's a very good fighter. You've heard me say it before. I think he's one of the most underrated.
He's also fighting this week.
I did not know that. I like him. I feel he's one of the most underrated fighters in boxing, so I do try to follow when he's fighting, and I must say I was not aware. I didn't see him on the schedule, so that does interest me. And Douglas, we didn't know it at the time that Soro was that good, but he turned out to be that good. And Douglas had a draw with Soro, so Douglas has been in with two tough guys in Soro and Kurtzidi. Lost to Kurtzidi, but showed a ton of heart, and I felt for him. I did feel that Douglas took the kind of beating in that fight that it does not surprise me that he has not fought since. I really hate to say it when a guy shows that kind of heart because he gave all he could for the game there, but he might have trouble making it back after that Kurtzidi beating. I hope he can, but he may not be able to. But I don't think Langford is going to come in with that kind of fortitude that Douglas did. He certainly doesn't come in with that kind of power. And I think, frankly, there are still certain styles. The styles of certain countries are not quite as pronounced as they used to be. We're Americans, but I do have to say it is the truth that these styles have become more Americanized throughout a lot of the other countries, especially in Western and Eastern Europe, and it has made a lot of their fighters more effective. But with that said, to me, a lot of times, British boxers with a boxing style be cautious, to say the least, and Langford does not have a high KO percentage. So I don't expect a war here. I expect Langford to be doing whatever he can to stay away and poke and peck. And
that's what he's going to do.
Proceed to hunt them down.
Yeah, he's going to be pecking away with his jab, and that's all good and well. I just don't think he hits hard enough to deter him. But anyways, Soro fights Javier Francisco Maciel in France. It looks like a stay busy fight. Maciel's not a bad fighter, but it's clearly a winnable fight for Soro. I'm just wondering what Soro's doing at this moment. He seems like he's been, a top 10 or borderline top 10 guy for a few years now, but I'm not sure if his promoters are not getting him the fights that he has earned. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. Maybe Soro speaks good enough English I can get him on the show and ask him. I'm not sure. But, my assumption is he wins that fight and then moves on. Anyways, we've also got Martin Murray versus Gabriel Rosada. I just want to briefly talk about this because if there is a fight, Langford, again, he doesn't look like he's going to get in the trenches. But if there are a couple of guys who look like they will, it looks like it'll be Martin Murray and Gabriel Rosada.
Now, neither guy hits hard, Jeremiah. I'm not high on either guy ability-wise, frankly. At any time in their careers, quite frankly, certainly not at the stage of both of these guys' careers. Another fight I see getting hyped. I just before the show, I always try to check all ratings. I saw Martin Murray has popped up at number 10 in the transnational top 10 at 168 pounds. I'm not sure how, frankly, but I guess
that's an alphabet move.
Yeah, exactly. National and in general, we certainly like them both better than the alphabets. I do. My only criticism with transnational is probably with the rankings board's composed of, they're probably trying to balance it out. I see, of course, I'm an American, but I think I can say this fairly. I think I see a little bit too much of a slant the other way, where there's some non-American fighters that pop up in their ratings or high in their ratings at certain times that I think maybe some of the people on the rankings board who are not American need to rein themselves in a little bit and not try to overcompensate, I guess I would call it. But that's a little bit of the trend I see there.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, and I've taken a look at the rankings board. I know at least one guy on the rankings board. Actually, I know a couple of guys on the rankings board. They've got a number of Brits sometimes, who live overseas. But yeah, I see the same thing. It does seem like there's slightly a non-American bias there, because I don't see how you could have Martin Murray in the top 10 any division. I mean, he hasn't had a significant win in a number of years, and he's looked outclassed even against George Groves. But I think the fight is both these guys are past their prime. I see it. They're going to fight. There will be a little bit of, they'll give the fans a little bit something to watch. But, either way, I don't think this does a whole lot for either one's career, but it's fun.
Yeah, I think again these are just my philosophies on certain types of things. I like fights where, you know, even if it's going to be an action type fight, if you've got one puncher or two punchers, obviously. What I find that even if we have a quote unquote action fight, but neither guy is a puncher, I don't find those to be all that suspenseful. And I think that then, to me, it's always missing a little bit there. For me, this fight would fall into that category. Can I guarantee you there's not going to be a knockout, maybe a stoppage by cut? You know, Rosado cuts a lot. I can't say that, but neither guy's a puncher. So I'm not saying there's not going to be action in this fight, but neither guy brings enough pop for me that this would be something that would have me sitting on the edge of my seat no matter how it plays out. And, you know, with already the hype it's getting beforehand, that's not really warranted for where both guys stand in the game. You know, a lot of our overseas friends will be happy to call it a fight of the year candidate if both guys throw a lot of punches and neither guy really gets rocked and goes to a decision.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree there. Anyways, we'll move on to the top-ranked card in StubHub Center in Carson, California. I've been to the StubHub Center. I think it's a great venue. It has great sight lines. You know, I saw Rios Alvarado there. The main event was Nonito Donaire. It's just a great venue. I ended up meeting Josecito Lopez at a restaurant beforehand. I mean, it's got good weather, good sight lines. It's just a good venue, and you oftentimes see people speak highly of it. I think deservedly so. Anyways, on the card, on the televised portion, you're going to have Gilberto Ramirez versus Max Bursak. It's just a mismatch. Am I wrong?
Bursak has lost to Jared Fletcher.
Well, that's all you need to know, really.
I mean, did you remember Jared Fletcher, Daniel Jacobs?
Yeah, Jacobs smashed him. I mean, it was a complete mismatch.
It was a complete mismatch. You know, you just look at his record.
Billy Joe Saunders stopped him in 2.
Yeah, this is top rank at its worst. This is top, and you know, I do think Gilberto Ramirez is a good fighter. For me, even if I'm ranking 8 divisions, then he's a light heavyweight. He really is just on the cusp of my top 10. So even though he wouldn't quite crack it, that still makes him. I mean, that's to me the utmost elite of the game is if you rank 8 weight divisions and the guy's a top 10 fighter. And of course, if you're ranking 17, he's at the top of 168. He hasn't fought for a while. You know, I do like him as a fighter. I thought he was just kind of a moving forward, good-sized body puncher guy, but he showed a different dimension against Arthur Abraham. You know, Bursak's not competition for him. This is top rank at its worst, and this is a pay-per-view show. You have to look at the business of boxing as well. This is a pay-per-view show going on at the same time as a Showtime card is going to be going on. I agree with you. The StubHub Center's a great venue. Frankly, myself, I think it's always been the case in boxing. I don't have a problem, and I encourage it if Bob Arum wants to cater to, you know, Latino fans, Mexican fans, Mexican-American fans, which I think he's doing with the venue and this lineup. I don't have a problem with that, but those fans, just as well as the rest of us, should get good fights. I don't think this is going to sell well on pay-per-view, so it shows fans who may like certain fighters still want to see good fights, and they want to get something for their hard-earned money. So, you know, Ramirez Bursak it's just not acceptable. It's simply not acceptable.
No. My guess is, like a lot of times, I believe this is Ramirez's first defense of his WBO title. Now stop the record, okay? Because it's a big surprise to John and I that Gilberto Ramirez, he owns a WBO title. Jesse Magdaleno, who's fighting above him, has a WBO title. Oscar Valdez, above him on the main event, has a WBO title. Vasil Lomachenko, WBO title, and on and on. So
Manny Pacquiao, WBO welterweight champion.
Yeah, and it's all a big surprise to us, right? Yeah.
It's ridiculous. You cannot take, to HBO's credit, because Bob Arum is completely tied in with HBO. Of course, he has no business with Showtime. And he is the main provider, even with Golden Boy also providing. The main provider to HBO is Top Rank. I don't know why, but they are. And HBO, what I was getting to is at one point HBO, to their very extreme credit, was attempting to not report on the alphabets, not talk about them in their telecast. Somewhere they reversed course many years ago, and all of a sudden all this WBO stuff started popping up with Top Rank and HBO, and it's definitely hurt the sport.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, and then above that, you have Jesse Magdaleno versus Adelson dos Santos. Do you know anything about dos Santos? I mean, for me, again, this just looks like a highlight fight for Magdaleno.
Dos Santos is really no better than Bersac. He's on the same level there. He's got a few losses already. Hasn't fought anybody. It's just a complete mismatch. Magdaleno looked very good against Bonaire. He looked very good throughout his career. I highly regard him. I don't like to see this, and I've got a suggestion for this card, where fans, the way boxing should be, and that I think some fans need to understand that might be missing it. You know, Jesse Magdaleno is a 122-pounder. You know, in the original 8 divisions, he'd be a featherweight. It's only 4 pounds south of 126. The UFC does not have such distinction, so any idea that it's necessary from some fans that don't know any better, or it's nonsense. What I'm saying is, what if this were a pay-per-view card from the StubHub in Carson, California, and Jesse Magdaleno was fighting Oscar Valdez? You think, well, why couldn't that happen? The only reason it can't happen is because of Top Rank.
Right. I
agree. They're both on the same card. We don't need them fighting no hope. Both fighting no hopers. Have them fight each other. Then make it I'm not saying it would have to be pay-per-view. How about, I bet you HBO would take that fight. You know, but we don't get that.
No, and it's round and around we go. It's constant. So speaking of Oscar Valdez, he is in the main event, and I think his fight is the most competitive of the two. I've seen Mariaga. Mariaga actually has a good amateur background. You know, I believe he was in the Olympics. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know he had a strong amateur background. I've seen a number of his fights on ESPN and whatnot. I believe you have too. He had a solid showing against Nicholas Walters, but if we remember, Nicholas Walters came in overweight, and Mariaga was the only one who could win that vacant title. So, you know, I think Mariaga is a solid opponent, but I think Valdez is just a notch better.
Mariaga, I mean, he's the best opponent on this card, and all he really is to me, he's got a good record, but he at least is a durable guy that doesn't come to fall down. So it's sort of like he's not in anybody's top 10, anybody's legitimate top 10. In other words, when I say legitimate top 10, I'm talking about transnational, the ring. If you're ranking 8 divisions, I'm not talking about the WBO, the WBC, the WBA, the IBF, certainly not the IBO. So he's not a top 10 guy in by any legitimate measurement, but he is durable. He went the distance with Walters. He's got some. He beat Chris Martin's not a bad fighter. He beat Christopher Martin. So you know the other guys don't. Dos Santos and Bersac don't even have that on their records. You know he has, and that's where I agree with you. He does have that. You know, he's got more of a legit record, so to speak, than the other two opponents. That shows he brings some durability. I would think, to me, maybe Valdez, I think he's good, but he might be a tick overrated. I'm still not saying he's not going to win this one easily. I think he will, but if you throw that into it with who he's fighting, and maybe you at least get a fight that gives you a little something here out of the 3, because you're not going to get anything out of the other 2.
Right. And so going on to the card that we're all going to watch, we're going to see, what do we have? Amanda Serrano versus Deanna Santana, Jermell Charlo versus Charles Hatley, and Shawn Porter versus Andre Berto. I like the top-ranked card. I see a number of these as mismatches, too. I mean, I don't know much about Serrano, unfortunately. I assume she gets by Santana, but you have Charlo versus Hatley, and that I see as a mismatch, too. I mean, Jermel, I think this is his first defense of whatever trinket that he holds. So like a lot of first defenses, it's a highlight fight, right? You know, these guys take advantage of their voluntaries, and they take an overmatched opponent in the process. Hatley, if you look at his record, he was stopped at 1 by Leonardo Tyner. And when you're blitzed by Tyner, it doesn't look good for you at the world-class level. I think Charlo wins easily here. What do you say, John?
I agree, and I'm not going to let PBC off the hook. I liked what they tried to do over the last 2 years in general. Of course, there were some glitches and some things you don't like, but in general. But now, for whatever reason, maybe it is finances, like you hear the rumors and the reports. Maybe it's something else. But they seem to be contracting onto Showtime, which is taking us back to our model where we were 2 years ago, where things in general for the sport were going nowhere. And why I preface it with all that is I don't like this fight at all. I think Jermel Charlo, has some talent. He's a good boxer. He's got amateur pedigree. And he's unbeaten, but he didn't look that good against John Jackson. He didn't look good against Matarosian. And, now he's fighting Hatley. Hatley's not in anybody's top 10. He's not in the transitional. He's not in the ring. Again, he certainly would not be ranked if there was only 8 weight divisions. So, and then Jermel Charlo, if you were ranking 8 weight divisions, he wouldn't crack the top 10 anywhere right now. I don't think he'd quite crack the middleweight top 10. It'd be close.
No, he's not as seasoned as his brother.
Exactly. His brother has surpassed him. Obviously, at 154, he'd be near the top. I don't have any problem with that if you like the 17 divisions. But again, so why do we get this fight on premium cable? Fans that HBO and Showtime, all the research would indicate it. That's why they still have boxing on there. You else is Showtime subscriber for boxing. He's not. I'm going to pay box for your pedigree. You can say.
You're breaking up a little bit, John.
Okay. Hatley does have some amateur pedigree. I'll give him that. He was a U.S. Olympic alternate. But one thing I did find funny in getting ready for this fight this morning, I was reading at Dallas.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a little bit again, John.
Okay. Yeah. Let me move over. Can you hear? Hopefully I'm a little better off now. But getting to what I'm saying is, you had Hatley's camp was interviewed, and he was interviewed in the Dallas paper that I was looking at this morning. And apparently Don King had picked up Hatley when his career went nowhere. And Hatley is now in litigation with Don King. And in response to the litigation, Don King has been quoted in the papers as saying, I got this guy a title shot, and he thanks me by suing me. And the Hatley camp had said, well, the WBC got us that title shot, not Don King. And I thought, well, the Hatley camp is either just saying that for litigation, or if they really believe that, they need to learn something from boxing, because this is one time I'd have to agree with Don King. If you don't think Don King can get you a WBC title shot, you don't know much about boxing. I don't care if Don King's in his 80s.
Yeah, especially when you're losing to Leonardo Tyner and your best win is over a long-faded Anthony Mundine. I mean, of course this is Don King getting it. But anyways, in regards to, potential title shots, we have Shawn Porter versus Andre Berto. There's a significant amount of hype around this, not a ton. When I see the predictions for this, I think the vast majority of people have it correct in believing that Shawn Porter is going to overcome Andre Berto. I am certainly of the opinion that Shawn Porter will beat Andre Berto. Berto, who I think has, good natural ability. I mean, he's got a good right hand, a good straight right hand. His uppercut is, maybe his best weapon. But this is a guy that I've been following for years now. I mean, I remember watching his fight against David Estrada, even Mitchell Trabant, Steve Forbes. I've seen all of his old title fights, and arguably he lost to Luis Collazo. His best win was probably Carlos Quintana, and then he loses to Victor Ortiz, struggles with Janzavec, gets beat up by Robert Guerrero, and then Jesus Soto Caras. So when you look at that and you examine it through the lenses of veteran fans like John and I, you see that he's beaten no top 5 fighter ever in his weight class. I would have to go through the rankings and see, but I can't envision Carlos Quintana or Luis Collazo being a top 5 guy. Victor Ortiz at the time might have been. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But you look at his record, and he's never beaten a top 5 guy in his life. Shawn Porter is a legitimate top 5 guy. Berto is now older, so in my opinion, Porter just beats up Berto like Guerrero and Soto Caras did to Berto. I think Porter does that, except more effectively.
I think he does too. I just give the same, and don't forget Berto had a positive PED test in there too. So he's now,
true.
If presuming he's got to be checked, and he's more on the line, and again he had a positive PED test, so that's just a fact. So if he
I think he could come into the fight. I think he could come into this fight being injected with whatever and still lose.
Yeah, he could. I'm just saying. Let's assume now he's on guard and he's not going to do that. He's not going to be whatever he was when he was on PEDs, as sad as that is to say. So you have that factor. I kind of, even though the styles are completely different, I have this one for me is kind of the same analysis as Kurt Seedy Langford, just in terms of the fighter makeups going in. Shawn Porter's a lot younger than Kurt Seedy, but Porter's been in some tough fights, and he's a pressure, come forward, give it your all, take some shots, come in hard, a lot of force, a lot of pressure, a lot of explosiveness type of fighter. And sometimes that type of a guy can just lose it all at once. I heard Andre Berto quoted saying that yesterday, and of course fighters want to make themselves feel good, and there's always a lot of hype, but I just thought to myself, this is the one time I actually agree with a fighter talking about the fight, and his analysis is probably not kidding himself. There might be something to it. Berto was basically saying Porter supposedly trains all year round, trains very hard. You watch him fight, you could believe that, and that with some of the tough fights that Porter has been in, that Berto is banking that he's going to get into the ring with Shawn Porter, and he might be in with a faded guy. We didn't see that when Porter fought Keith Thurman, but of course now we're post Keith Thurman, and that was a tough fight. One of the reasons I'm slightly tolerant of this fight is that Shawn Porter has fought Kell Brook, even though that was not an exciting fight. He fought Adrian Broner. He's now fought Keith Thurman. The guy, he's one of the few guys in boxing today that you might argue could use a breather, and that's probably why I think that Al Heyman and PBC set this fight up with Porter, between Porter and Berto. But my criticism then again of PBC is this is the type of fight, if you're going to do that for Shawn Porter, this is the one you want on free TV. Now, maybe PBC's finances just aren't allowing it at this point from the rumors, what you hear, but this would be the one that should be on free TV then. Not that you don't want your best on free TV, but if they've got an obligation to Showtime or they've got to save some of that for them, don't put this one on Showtime. Throw this out on free TV somewhere. Because I don't think if Porter's what he has been, which I think he will be, I believe he's 28. He should still have enough left, even though he's a pressure fighter. And Berto's faded also. That's part of my analysis too. This is not a fresh Andre Berto, as you correctly pointed out about his career coming up to this point. And then, this was not he knocked out Victor Ortiz. You have fans saying, and he had to get off the floor to do it. What did Victor Ortiz have left at this point after being knocked out by Collazo and having laid off and been acting? He didn't have anything. So who has? He was losing to Josecito Lopez, and then he landed a bomb, which that was an exciting fight. I liked the fight, but he was losing up to that point before he landed the bomb. Shawn Porter's got a good chin. It's going to be tough to see how Berto is going to pull this off. Right,
yeah, and I'll take, Berto's been beat up badly by Guerrero and Soto Karass. So, whatever Porter might have lost from the Thurman fight, I think Berto's probably lost that 2 or 3-fold with some of the beatings that he's taken, plus, some of the clear losses. The Mayweather loss probably didn't do much for him. But again, I think he's got a little more wear and tear. The tread on his tire has been grinded down a little bit, but I think Porter takes it clearly here. I'm going to say it's a stoppage. I don't think Porter's had one in a bit, but I think he gets it here. So we're going to move on to some news. What would you like to talk about, John? What's been in your news feed that you feel like you got to get out there?
Well, my first thing would be an overarching theme that we've already touched on, which is good. I think that we've set it up properly, which is if I like to come at things at this point of my life, having followed boxing for almost my entire life, that I like to be kind of an advocate of the sport, not a certain promoter or fighter, even though, of course, I like certain fighters and certain things I might see a promoter do, but always just trying to look at it as what's good for the sport. I want the fighters to make as much money as they can, but then to have good fights and have the sport grow. I don't like what I'm seeing where if you go through an analysis, which I think you always have to do at least one of these two analyses, which is take the sport as if it only had 8 divisions and 1 champ per division and see are the fighters you're getting in this fight or one, or for your big fights, it should be both of them or a champ or in the top 10. Are you getting that? Or at the very least, if you want or like the 17 weight divisions, which I don't, at least take it 1 champ per division, top 10, look at your ring or your transnational rankings, same analysis. Am I getting a champ versus a top 10 contender? Am I getting 2 top 10 contenders fighting? We're not getting that. Look at a fight that I'm as intrigued in like everybody else, but even Joshua Klitschko. Vladimir Klitschko has not fought for over a year. I'd be the first to tell you if Vladimir Klitschko was active after Fury and picked up a win, he'd be ranked number 1, maybe number 2. But that hasn't happened. I'm not even saying it's his fault. I actually believe him in this case that probably was caused by Fury's problems, but still, it doesn't change the fact that he has not been fighting. He's been out of the ring. And that's one of the big fights we've got now. I'm not saying it wouldn't be big in another area. It reminds me of Larry Holmes coming back, trying to take on Mike Tyson. If you want to kind of have a historical parallel, that kind of is the fight that this keeps reminding me of. But again, it's still not really 2 top 10 guys facing each other. But that's not our worst example. There's a lot worse than that, like what we've talked about this weekend that Top Rank and PBC are giving us. That's what I'm talking about. Let's go, for example, to Canelo Alvarez versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Chavez is not ranked in any top 10 of anything. He's not ranked in my analysis. He's not ranked in the transnational. He's not ranked in the ring. Canelo Alvarez is, like it or not, he's the linear middleweight champion. Even if you're not looking at him at that analysis, he's certainly one of the top fighters in his division, wherever you want to look at him as 160 pounds or 154 pounds. And Chavez is not ranked anywhere, and that's a pay-per-view fight. In a past era, that would be your middleweight champion in an over the weight stay busy fight against a former middleweight contender who has slipped. So is that what you want to pay $70 for? These are the problems I see on the horizon. I don't like what I see getting signed or getting talked about, especially if this demise of PBC turns out to be reality, which means all their stuff will then go on to premium cable on Showtime for the most part. To me, cause for concern for any boxing fan as we're here in April and we start looking at how the rest of the year shapes up.
Right. And, in regards to that whole top 10 thing, I mean, you look at a boxing schedule and you really don't see a lot of, top 10 fights going on. I mean, you see a lot of mismatches. I mean, not only to the, Alvarez Chavez, but you see Gervonta Davis versus Liam Walsh. Okay. I mean, Walsh is a decent fighter, but Davis already looks much too much for him. You got Gary Russell Jr. versus Oscar Escandon. Sorry, don't know if I got that right. that to me is a mismatch as well. You do have, you got Adonis Stevenson versus Fonfara. That I think it just plays on Stevenson's what he's become known for. I mean, this is a guy who beat Chad Dawson, and all eyes were on him because he inherited the lineal light heavyweight championship of the world, and he's done, he's forced the ring to strip him because he's refused to take on any sort of tough competition. You see him in the background sometimes saying he wants to fight the winner of Ward Kovalev, but he doesn't really look like he puts his name into the hat. He's not really putting his name into the hat. So I think, it's unfortunate. I'm personally going to wait until we see, what else is shaping up for the rest of the year, because again, I do think a lot of boxing's best fights happen in the fall, and I think there are a few bright spots. Errol Spence versus Kell Brook, I think, is one of them. I also think what was announced recently.
Certainly Spence Brook is clearly, that meets all my criteria for a top 10 fight. That's acceptable.
Yeah, and Andre Ward Kovalev, I think, is the best that what we got.
Yes, that also meets all the criteria, and I agree with you what you said about Stevenson. And for you, like myself, and a lot of the hardcore fans or fans who are also historians who follow the sport in that context, this has not happened in all the years of boxing. Of course, there's been times something like this, but it hasn't been to this extent. We basically have 3 lineal champions in the original 8 divisions: Tyson Fury at heavyweight, Adonis Stevenson at light heavyweight, and Canelo Alvarez at middleweight. And they have all 3 of them now, for different reasons, so tarnished the lineal title and just pushed it so far without taking on reasonable opposition that now if you're a historian of the sport or a fan that cares about the history of the sport or likes to follow in this context, you are really, for the first time in boxing history, reaching a point where you say, traditionally only a lineal title. Matt Fleischer established it, and he was the man for that, the founder of the ring. You lose it by retirement or in the ring, and that's it. Now, for the first time, really, to me, in boxing history, we have a legitimate moment where you can't really go on. I'm trying to figure out the answer, but you can't go on with Fury, Stevenson, and Alvarez like this. They may not all lose that recognition at the same time, but they may deserve to lose it. And then for historians and fans of the sport who like to follow its history and have lineal champions, you have to then come up with a new criteria, something along the lines that the ring did of when is a lineal title lost. For the people that like to knock lineal titles, I don't think you should knock lineal titles. I think that all hardcore fans of the sport need to now have this discussion. At what point, if any, should a lineal title be vacated if a fighter has not retired and is continuing to fight?
Yeah, and I think the ring's policy of fighting a top 5 guy, within a 2-year span, I think that's perfectly reasonable. With the way boxing is and just how muddied it's become with the numerous alphabet trinkets and the promotional politics, I think it's perfectly reasonable. And I think, again, you go to Stevenson, who, Transnational still rates as the man at 175. You've got the Ring magazine who decided to take it away from him. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable policy. Again, you'd like to see Stevenson lose it in the ring, but look at his recent competition. I mean, who really wants to watch a Fonfara rematch? Nobody that I know of. Maybe, Fonfara and his family. I don't know, Stevenson and his family.
Exactly. Remember, Fonfara is a good fighter, but he's also, within recent years been knocked out in 1 round by Joe Smith Jr. So the point is, how can a rematch be warranted when in the interim he was knocked out in 1 round by Joe Smith Jr.? It just can't. That's where the ring is right. It just can't. I'm trying to figure out if just the way I would look at it, I adopt the Ring's policy or something along those lines. But I do feel like this year in 2017, literally in the first time in boxing history, I think we are at that point where, Muhammad Ali was forced out of the ring by politics, and then the U.S. Supreme Court reversed his conviction, and he came back and fought the number 1 contender. Now, there was then a dispute. Okay, he was the last one to have it in the ring, and Joe Frazier had become the New York athletic commission's recognized champion in the interim, but why was one of the reasons that the fight of the century in 1971 was so big? There were two guys with legitimate boxing historian claims who are undefeated, fighting each other in the ring. If you want to make, of course, that's one of the greatest fights literally of all time, and is rightfully called the fight of the century. But why was it? I mean, people cared about those things. So, for anybody today who's saying we shouldn't care about this, take a look at the sport at its peak, and they certainly cared about it then. I guarantee you. And all you have to do is take a look at your boxing history.
Yeah, and just use the UFC as an example. I mean, there seems to be this rivalry between, boxing fans and MMA fans. I see it time and time again. I've got respect for both sports, to be honest with you. In regards to like the UFC, I'm a casual fan. I mean, I might have seen 10 fights last year, and that's when, boxing's not on, or if there's a lot of hype surrounding it, because, the UFC pairs the best with the best many times. But look at the example that Dana White used. Okay, Dana White, he used to write for? Did he used to write for the Boston Herald? I don't know. I feel like he used to cover the sport.
He came from a boxing background. He was an amateur fighter.
Right.
He was involved in boxing. That's his roots there. So he came from. He still says he loves boxing, and he actually, in that vein, had said, and I believe he was sincere. He had no reason not to be. He supported what Al Heyman was trying to do with the PBC. Just as somebody from a boxing background, he said there was plenty of chances somebody else could have tried to do it, but none of them did it, and Al Heyman's the one trying it. So, and that's where Dana White. If you look, that's where all these ideas came from. It's just getting back to the glory days of boxing. I mean, he went with 8 weight divisions. He went with one champ, basically went with one champ per division. That's all from boxing. That's not something the UFC invented. That's from classic boxing.
Right, but it's a winning strategy. I mean, I don't see how some of these boxing promoters can't see it. I mean, it's so obvious to guys like you and I. I mean, we don't run the sport. We don't have our hands in all this political nonsense. You know what I mean? But look, you have a guy who's recognized as the champion, right? We know who is the man. You look at the UFC. We know who the welterweight champion is. We know who the bantamweight champion is. We know who the heavyweight champion is. There's no gray there. We know there's black and white. We also know that they're likely going to fight the best contender that they have at least once a year. And so this is a winning strategy. You have less classes. You have one champion per division. They're going to fight the best at least one time in that year. And again, this is exactly why the UFC has made so much headway into the American public's eye. I mean, it's become widely recognized sport. They've also marketed their sport very well, but it's just a winning strategy. You have one guy who is the champion. He's going to fight the best, and it just works for us. But what do you have with boxing fans? Okay, well, you got Adrian Broner, who's allegedly, this many-time champion in this many divisions because this alphabet trinket said so, and you've got more weight classes. I don't understand why the boxing promoters cannot see, how this works. The best fight the best. I mean, what more do you need to know?
I think that I agree, and I do follow the UFC, so I'm familiar with it, and I have come to follow that. But yeah, what the boxing promoters didn't get, and it really started really. It's been a long time, but it started really getting bad. Oh, you're getting close to 30 years ago, and they started just only looking at the short term. In other words, it's almost ironic. Bob Arum and Don King have lived very long lifespans by any comparison you make to the general public, and they are both still active. It's almost ironic that in other words, what I'm saying is maybe if Bob Arum knew that he'd still be promoting in his early 80s and Don King knew he'd still be promoting in his early 80s, maybe 30 years ago they would have looked at things different and looked at the long term a little more, even in their own business interests. But they probably were not looking at it that way, thinking, well, I've got to get what I can now, and we'll keep looking at the short term, looking at where we are. But one thing I would plead with any boxing fans is that I think that we are really in the first time in the history of the sport, we are on the cusp of basically having the equivalent of no champions. And I say no champions by having too many champions. If boxing fans do not start recognizing lineal champions or looking at the ring champs and the transnational champs only, at least at this point, whatever you prefer, and ignoring these alphabets, you are now just about where you have no champions. And I don't think some fans realize that it's not going to work well when we just start kind of having what it'll turn into is just sort of champion by polling. In other words, if in June the fans and the media decide that, say, Gennady Golovkin is the best 160-pound fighter in the world, in June he will be that. But then if all of a sudden the wind blows and the media coverage changes and in September they decide it's Canelo Alvarez or Jamal Charlo, then it'll be them. And in other words, there will never be any changes in the ring as to who's the best, which is the idea throughout boxing history when you have a champion and what the UFC still does. So I think we're there. I actually think we are there, that we are in danger for the first time in boxing history. Yes, you had times where you had two champions at the WBA and the WBC, and frankly that was worse than people sometimes make out who lived it. That was not good, and people didn't like it. But of course, it was better than what we had now. But you would have a unification fight, and you still had the ring and things like that. I think we're really on the cusp of, for the first time in boxing history, basically having no champions by having too many champions.
Right, and I'm surprised that this hasn't signaled more red flags. I mean, why is it taking two guys like us, again, who, we're not writing for the Ring magazine. We're not, on ESPN radio or, in some top promotional banner. It takes two guys like us to bring up the fact. I mean, this is a, for lack of a better word, this is a scary situation. It's a proposition that the hardened fans should wholly reject. I mean, we're not only destroying the tradition in boxing culture by not anointing people as the best of the best. Of course, we're not holding these promoters accountable and making them give us the fights that we want and need. It bodes well for the sport to have these guys who, again, we recognize as champions. It's not enough for Canelo Alvarez to be popular and make his living off sales from Mexican fans. That's not enough for us, and it shouldn't be enough for anybody. We've got to promote these sort of things much better. Again, if we don't, and not only that, we also have to get behind people who have this vision. People who want to unify the sport, people who want to, again, if they want to create something like the UFC, I honestly think we should get behind that. I mean, the sport more than ever. You need somebody to pick up the fragmented pieces, and whether that's Al Heyman, whether that happens to be Richard Schaefer or whomever. I'm not sure who has that kind of foresight. Al Heyman seems to be the best candidate at the moment, but these are the sort of guys we need to put our chips behind, so we can have a sport that we can all enjoy and love and realize its full potential. I mean, people don't realize, okay, so you have the NFL, you have Major League Baseball and NBA. That these are big sports, right? They've got a lot of people who watch them time and time again. But unlike boxing, these are not global sports. I mean, boxing has seen an influx of all sorts of people from the former USSR. India has started to inject a few boxers into the professional ranks. China as well. Bob Arum is trying to open up the Chinese market. The Japanese scene has been strong for many years. You have a good number of fighters from the Philippines, and I think you will continue to do so because they'll follow in the footsteps of one of their heroes, Manny Pacquiao. So Thailand, strong tradition in boxing. Obviously, the U.S., Mexico, Argentina, on and on and on. This is a sport that truly has global appeal, which a lot of sports cannot claim to. So if you could have some sort of white knight ride up on his horse, pick up the pieces, put it all together, and put this thing in a a direction we can all get behind, this sport could really be massive. Potentially it could be the biggest sport in the world. I don't know. It'd have to compete with soccer, of course, or as they call it, football, and I think rightfully so. But this sport has a ton of potential. We just need somebody out there who has a vision, again, to pick up the pieces and move this thing forward. Please, I'm begging you, get it together.
I agree, and you're just adding on that, which I agree with everything you said. I think that I don't know this for certain, but I think the evidence was there circumstantially and even otherwise with when you saw it started out. I think Al Heyman, that was what he was trying to do with PBC. I think that was his ultimate goal. I think the problem he ran into, which then ultimately ended up probably being money, was it was with all these fiefdoms you have in boxing, it was too hard to.
I like that.
It was too hard to build it with present day, known fighters who were well known in the sport, and it's not that it was their fault either. I think the fighters did a pretty good job of getting on board with Al Heyman, the ones that he had, but and I think he treats them well. It seems to be by all accounts, but it was just too hard to negotiate all the TV, all the fiefdoms, and kind of make money and do it at the same time and keep the fighters happy. It ended up being, I'd say, I probably saw it really at the end of even the first year of PBC. I think it became so overwhelming because, again, this is completely to Al Heyman's credit. Did you notice in the first 11 months or so of PBC, and I love this, he did not mention the alphabet organizations during any of the PBC telecasts. Then at the very end, when Danny Garcia fought Robert Guerrero, all of a sudden he let them bring a WBC belt into the ring, and they started touting it as being for the WBC title. I don't think that was Danny Garcia's fault or Robert Guerrero. I just think that then it was becoming too hard for Al Heyman to handle all these concerns, and he had to start giving on a thing here, giving on a thing there, and as Dave, it just became a problem.
Yeah, and I think you pay attention to politics. I'm not quite sure how much, but I think you pay attention to politics, and of course
Definitely.
you have the law background. So what I sort of liken it to is, okay, so you have a politician who he's viewed as an outsider. He wants to make all this change. What his political affiliation is wholly irrelevant. Okay, so you have a guy who wants to make all sorts of change in Washington on Capitol Hill, and then he gets into the game. He starts rubbing elbows with some of these political insiders, and he realizes just how difficult it is to get a bill passed through the Senate and the House. How when you got to deal with lobbyists and whatnot. So you come in as an outsider. You have these idealistic notions about how to change the world, and then you actually get sucked into the machine and realize just how difficult it really is.
I agree 100%. I think the analogy is perfect, and I think I can take the analogy a step further and make everybody happy, even with the analogy. I think politically, which I do follow closely, I feel exactly what you described and happened to Al Heyman is exactly what happened to some degree to get this, both Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Both were campaigning to a certain degree, even though Barack Obama had been a senator. But as sort of outsiders, we never had an African-American president, of course, and Barack Obama had not been in politics, certainly not at the national level for that long, and obviously, very talented at it. But here's what I saw with both. The one similarity I did think I saw with both men is they were successful in the election, and then the day after, they have to put a government together. And if you're coming in as an outsider or a semi-outsider, and all of a sudden you've got to run the United States federal government, you've got world security concerns, you've got billions of dollars domestically that you've got to account for. Who do you get to run these things? Where do you find these people? You can't come up with a team of outsiders in that short of a period of time to run things. So again, like with the Al Heyman analogy, then what do? You have to start playing ball within the parameters of the structure that's already there, and the next thing you know, you're not an outsider anymore, you're an insider.
Exactly. No, I think that's exactly correct. The one other piece of news I want to talk about before we get off the show here, I don't know if you followed this at all, but I'm kind of interested just because because of your law background. So, there's been the whole Canelo Alvarez thing with his former promotional banner, All-Star Boxing. And so he came up through Mexico, obviously, and then Golden Boy took over the contract. Well, Zabala, the guy who runs the All-Star Boxing promotional banner, he said that Golden Boy breached the contract, and the court has awarded him $8.5 million plus 4.75% interest. Now, have you been following this story at all?
I have followed it at times, and I just and I was actually following it extensively at one point. Now, I saw the recent headline. The most recent developments I did not get the chance to read within the headlines, but that is fit. I do litigation. We get judgments, that type of thing. I'm familiar with that type of thing. Let's just say, and you did describe it right. It seemed you did. If I didn't just catch this last piece, but I remember when All-Star had taken it to court, and I understood what the issues were. If All-Star's it could be very big. If All-Star, in fact, has a judgment against Canelo Alvarez and Golden Boy at this point, they do have the right to collect that judgment, and certainly Golden Boy and Canelo have assets. In other words, if that judgment is that would be certainly something that Golden Boy and Canelo would want to appeal. But if that judgment is affirmed, they're gonna have to pay that money, and that would be a big problem for them, because with the state of the sport at this point, even that Chavez fight is going to have trouble covering those kind of numbers.
Right. Yep, I agree. So, anyways, we're going to wrap up the program. John, I appreciate you coming on, as I always do. It's always nice to talk boxing with you. I mean, we've known each other for a while now, and again, it's just always nice to have some banter, because a lot of times when you hit the boards, you hit Twitter, whatever it is, there's just, unfortunately, a lack of knowledge. Not a lot of guys you can talk to, especially in depth. So, again, John, I want to thank you for coming on.
Great to be here, and I enjoyed it as well, and always enjoy talking with you, and I hope we at least gave boxing fans some things to think about there.
Absolutely, and I think we did. So, anyways, this is John, and this is Jeremiah. For thegruelingtruth.net, you can check our shows on Stitcher, Spreaker, iTunes, just about anywhere you can find podcasts. I had an interview with Aegis Kavialauskas recently that was just posted on the website this morning, so that's worth checking out. The guy was a former two-time Olympian, and one of the welterweight prospects I think a lot of people should look out for, one-punch type stuff. We've got all sorts of other interviews with basketball, baseball, football, on and on and on. So for thegruelingtruth.net, I am Jeremiah. This is John, and I hope everybody has a good night.